Hello, everyone. This is Steve Marinucci, freelance writer on Billboard.com, Variety.com, Access.com, and whatever.com. Welcoming you to another Things We Said Today, where we talk about the Beatles, past, present, and sometimes to come. Let me introduce our two co-hosts. First of all, from the state of Connecticut, who says he's a Yankees fan. Boo. You are a Yankees fan.
I might as well be a Yankees fan the way the Mets are playing right now,
okay.
but I'm still a true blue Mets fan.
Okay. All right. The host of Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And from the state of Maine, somebody I know is not a Red Sox fan.
Definitely not.
Our musicologist, author of God That's Something, How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Changed Everything. That is unavailable at the moment, unfortunately. And The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop, which is available. The head of the Beatles desk at the New York Times that you didn't know existed, Mr. Alan Cosin. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Steve. Hello, everyone. Let's say the former head of the Beatles.
You mean there's somebody doing it now? Somebody has taken that over?
No, it's just that I left.
Oh, okay, that's right. It's the mythological Beatles desk at the New York Times. Anyway, we're going to run through our usual spate of Beatles news first before we get to our topic of the evening, which will be the Red and the Blue albums. We're going to talk about those tonight. First of all, we have a sad piece of news, the passing of Roy Young, whose name is probably not familiar to everyone, but who played with the Beatles in Hamburg. Alan, do you want to talk about that?
Well, he was an organist. I can't remember whose group he played in, though, actually. He was in another of the bands, and a lot of those bands and the Beatles jammed together now and then, sat in with each other. And probably Roy Young's most famous contribution to preserved Beatles history is he plays organ on Red Hot, the Hamburg recording of Red Hot.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. There may be a couple of others where you hear him, too, but on Red Hot, he's, sort of right out there. So, yeah.
He did play with Tony Sheridan at the Top 10 Club.
Right.
At a time when apparently Ringo was in the band with Tony for a while. So this led to Roy going from the Top 10 to the Star Club, which is where he got to play with the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and somebody remarked this that his name was often left out of any Beatles history, and that's that's relatively true. He's really not that well known. That's too bad. He never really got the credit. I mean, not that he did a ton of stuff, but his name was never really associated that much with the Beatles. But one story I saw said that Young was offered a place in the Beatles, and he turned it down because he had that contract with Star Club. And then he went on to play with Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers.
Right.
So
and that band recorded a cover version of "Got to Get to
My Life." Correct.
Which Paul produced.
Right.
And that version, by the way, made the top 10 as a single in the UK.
That's right. Yeah, and it was a good version too. It quite. And he also, Mr. Cosin, recorded the song "Baby You're Good for Me," written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice for the Albert Finney film Gumshoe.
Well, he might as well have joined the Red Sox, for God's sake. I mean,
that was to give him credibility.
I'm sorry, I'm cracking up. I'm sorry.
From Red Hot to the Red Sox via Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Okay.
Now, there's an article that I believe you might have shared on Facebook, Steve, from The Independent,
right,
where it says that Roy Young played the piano on Sweet Georgia Brown and Swanee River. I know that Swanee River is not with the Beatles, the Tony Sheridan recording, but it could be that he's on the Beatles recording with Sweet Georgia Brown on piano.
There's two versions, as I recall. Alan, tell me, or somebody tell me, correct me. Aren't there two versions of Swanee River, one with and one without?
If there's one with the Beatles, one doesn't exist anymore. Okay,
because I thought there was one. There were two of them on the Bear Family set. I don't have that handy in front of me. It's in the other room, but I could have sworn there were two on that set, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, there were two versions where the later one reflected the Beatles' popularity with Tony singing about them. So the vocals were different.
Sweet Georgia Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
no, but I'm talking about Swanee River. We're talking about Swanee River.
Oh, okay. Swanee River, I'm pretty sure the Beatles never played on.
Okay. All right. This is what we're trying to dig this stuff up out of our heads. Anyway, the next piece of news is it's been the Harrison family estate. The Harrison estate has been very quiet for a while, and on April 27th they announced that they were starting a new record label, Harris Songs, with one R, which that's weird. But it's going to be devoted entirely to Harrison's archive of Indian classical and world music, along with his collaborations. Now, which is really, they put out the box set collaborations several years ago, which apparently is out of print. But one of the CDs in that box set is Chants of India. But the first two releases on Harris Songs will be Chants of India, which of course George promoted with John Fugelsang, George and Ravi in that VH1 appearance, which turned out to be George's last TV appearance. And they're also going to put out or reissue Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan live in concert 1972. Unfortunately, not on CD, which is kind of a shame. But that doesn't necessarily mean there won't be something down the line. So
right now it's strictly a digital release.
Right. And it's going through. They're putting it. The label is being formed with Craft Recordings, which is part of Concord Music, which is also home to the Wilburys and others. So there we go. There is another Harrison connection.
It's kind of weird to call it a record label if there aren't going to be records of any kind. You can debate whether a CD is a record or not. I think it is, but if there's no physical manifestation, it's not really a record, right?
That's true, but we don't know what their plans are for the label down the road. It may very well, they may very well have something in the works down the road that will do that. So I don't know. We'll cross our fingers and hope. So. Anyway, next piece of news, Paul McCartney has another award in his bonnet. Can I say bonnet? He received the Companion of Honor, which I had never heard of. And he's been knighted. Why, what is this? By the way, he said, I see this as a huge honor for me and my family, and I think of how proud my Liverpool mom and dad would have been to see this. Well, I didn't know what the Companion of Honor was. And I had to look it up, and I'm going to read straight off what I found. It's a British honorary institution founded in 1917 by King George V. The only rank is that of companion, awarded to men and women who have rendered conspicuous national service, especially in the advancement of culture. And of course, he got it from music. It said membership of the order is limited to 65, although foreigners can become honorary companions. So, and it says the prime ministers of Commonwealth countries are allowed to make nominations to the order. Inductions don't confer any additional title. He's already Sir Paul McCartney, and what's better than that? But what I've found here is it says companions are entitled to add CH after their name. So now he's Sir Paul McCartney CH. It says the order's badge is a gold medallion suspended from a carmine ribbon surmounted by a crown. It depicts an armored knight mounted on a horse and an oak tree from which hangs the shield of the royal arms. The blue enameled border of the medallion bears the motto, in action faithful and in honor clear. Okay.
Those Brits are so cute.
We have some British people listening to us, Alan.
Yes, I know. I send all the nasty letters, so I figured I'd give them a new opportunity. And,
okay. Okay. And finally, we're just going to mention this very briefly. There was a story in Broadway World about a musical called Dear John, Why Yoko that sounds very anti-Yoko, but it's actually not. It says it's a musical portrayal of the tempestuous and inspiring love and life shared between Yoko Ono and John Lennon. Inspired by Yoko Ono's extraordinary life and her forward-thinking art, combined with the musical inspiration of Broadway hits a la Miss Saigon, Les Mis, there's Andrew Lloyd Webber again, Jesus Christ Superstar, there he is again.
Andrew Lloyd Webber was not Les Mis.
Oh, wasn't he? I'm sorry. No. Jesus Christ Superstar was, though.
Yeah.
Right? Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Rent and Dreamgirls. So all those great musicals.
Oh, God.
And Andrew Lloyd Webber figures into everything in the Beatles story.
He's everywhere. Andrew Lloyd Webber is everywhere. We're not going
He is. Alan. As he should be. Yeah. Highest rated TV special a few weeks ago for Easter. Jesus Christ Superstar.
Still haven't watched that. Still haven't watched that whole thing yet. It's sitting on my DVR.
I still never intend to watch anything.
I didn't think. I did have. Well, never mind. Let's not go into that. We won't go off on that.
I know you said finally before, but we should at least mention that there are unconfirmed reports.
Oh, thank you.
According to Beatle fan. According to Beatle fan.
And there are. We should say there are other sources too. Being the journalist I am, there are Beatle fan reported it, but so have others. That
first two Wings albums
that we are aware of, are saying that the. Go ahead, Ken.
Wildlife and Red Rose Speedway, the first two Wings albums, are slated for the next release as part of the McCartney Archive series of remastered albums scheduled for release this fall. And according to what I had read on Facebook, there's supposed to be an announcement expected in the next month or so on the release of Paul's new studio album. And it's also likely that we'll be hearing more concert dates coming from Paul, in addition to the announcement last week, which we didn't mention yet, about Paul headlining the Austin City Limits Festival in October.
Which makes the idea that there are more American shows fairly likely. I wouldn't say definitely likely, but I would say fairly likely. So
he's always been generous when it comes to the U.S.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see how the announcements of the new album and the remasters stack. In other words, where they fall, because he's not going to want to have one on top of the other. So,
probably not. No. And if the White Album is remastered, as we think it will be, which I would think would probably be coming out in November on the 50th anniversary, he probably wouldn't want any of those releases to be too close to that.
Right. Right. So we will. Yeah. I mean, we will see. We will see. We will see. Anyway.
And another thing that you forgot about one of George's guitars about to be auctioned.
Damn. That's right too. There's so much to talk about. George's first electric guitar is being auctioned by Julian's Auctions, and I wrote about it on Access, and I don't remember the details.
I have them.
You have them? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Well, he first got the guitar, it says, in a trade with Roy Ennis, who was a member of the Swinging Blue Jeans. And in 1966, with the Beatles' names inscribed on it, believed to have been written by Neil Aspinall, it was donated to a contest and won by a German band.
You're reading that right off my story, you know.
Well, you write so well that I don't want to rewrite it.
Thank you.
So if you have the article there, why don't you read the rest of it?
I do have the article. I have it right in front of me, actually. This is going to be fun. The guitar was owned by the group singer and guitarist Frank Dostal until his death in 2017, and his widow is the one that is selling it. And Julian says it's worth between $200,000 and $300,000. And they used a quote from Andy Babiak, the author of Beatles Gear, says George considered the Hofner as one of his favorite guitars, which was the third guitar he ever owned. It is one of the most historically important guitars as it marks the chapter in music history when the Beatles transitioned to a rock and roll band playing electric guitars. And he used it from the starting in the Quarrymen days, so it definitely is historic. And it's part of their Music Icons auction, which includes a whole bunch of stuff, including a 1963 Beatles set list, which I did not look up, but that would be interesting too to see that. But anywho, okay.
By the way, this is going to be at the Hard Rock Cafe.
Yes, it is.
New York City on May the 19th for anyone that's interested.
And you could go, Ken.
And there's one more thing.
Whoa. Yes.
George Martin's Air Studios are up for sale.
Aha.
I've been there. It's a beautiful place. It's in like an old church that they've converted it into recording studios. It's got 3 studios. He's had several studios over the years, including the one in Montserrat. We know it was devastated by a hurricane. But this one is Air Lyndhurst. It's in Hampstead, part of London. And I went to interview him there in '95, just before the anthology, and got to look around a little. And it really is a gorgeous studio. The largest of the rooms, which I guess is their Studio 1, is, orchestra size, and a lot of film soundtracks are recorded there. And, I don't know what will become of it, given that recording studios, like record companies and records themselves, are sort of under a lot of financial pressure these days. But there's supposed to be like $4 million worth of just equipment in the studio. So so if we all want to chip in, I think it would be cool to have, ultimate.
We could take up a collection with our listeners. We could do that. Maybe we could just own the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, we could use a new studio to do this show.
Definitely.
It's so confining, to work the way that we're doing. Our listeners should help us out, I think.
I can just see them all going, yes!
This is like soupy sales here.
Really?
I saw that show.
Yeah, so did I many times.
I saw the one where he said to go into your father's wallet and take the green stuff, and
I did not see that one. I saw many others though. But
we're not saying that, okay?
No. Do you happen to know what albums might have been recorded there?
Not offhand, but I know that U2 and Coldplay, but McCartney's recorded there. I think he's recorded in that one. I think that clip of "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" with George Martin doing the new orchestration for the Love Show. I'm pretty sure that is in the large room of Air Lyndhurst. Kate Bush, I think, may have recorded there. It's hard to tell, from the listing I've seen, because I think they're talking about Air in general and not just Air Lyndhurst. So a lot of people have recorded for Air, but I'm not sure which Air they've recorded at.
Yeah, I'm looking at a picture. It's a gorgeous studio. Yeah. Oh man, that is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That is really nice. Anyway,
maybe Paul should buy it.
Yeah. He could probably do it. He could probably their website shows their clients, and it doesn't make any distinction as to where they've recorded. I mean, there's who's here? Katy Perry, David Gilmour. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot. There's a lot of names, mentioned here, but no distinction as to which studio. Adele, Pete Townsend, but again, Van Morrison. But it doesn't mention which studios they used. But anyway, okay. So the main topic of the evening is the Red and the Blue albums, and I'm going to kick it off, and I'm going to say, listening to this, I mean, when Ken brought this up actually, and I was going, well, okay,
It
but
was
listen,
actually originally a reader suggestion, wasn't it?
was it a reader
That's
suggestion?
right.
Okay,
That's right.
but when we thought about it, I kind of went, okay, but listening to it, I can't understand why it gets passed over so much, because it's actually a great compilation, and it's actually much better than the one. Not only because it's more well-rounded than the one compilation is. It's a little weird because of the mixes on it. Some of the mixes, like All My Lovin', as I recall, it was the first place that I believe All My Lovin' and I Want to Hold Your Hand were in stereo.
All My Lovin' was stereo way back to With the Beatles. You may be thinking of something else, though.
Well, okay, yeah.
On CD, yeah, actually, right, on CD. Anything from the first 4 CDs
right.
that's on here were stereo for the first time on CD.
Which was All My Lovin' and...
I thought you meant in, the history of the universe.
Well, actually, there were quite a few. Can't Buy Me Love is in stereo, but there's also a few in mono. Love Me Do is in mono. She Loves You, obviously, is in mono. But in any event, but it was fun listening to it again. It had been a long time since I'd picked it up, and I was really pleased at how good this was. It's too bad it's kind of been shoved under the rug because it deserves better. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, the reason it's been shoved under the rug is because the Beatles 1 took its place.
Right.
And I know that what you said, it's more well-rounded. That's because these collections included album tracks. It wasn't strictly the singles.
Mm-hmm.
But the Beatles 1 does as great a job as you can possibly do at packing all the singles, US and UK combined, that hit number 1 on one CD. And that was a great accomplishment, putting it all on one CD. But if you want something that's a good starting point for newbies, for new Beatle fans, that's where these collections work. And I think that, kind of like the Beatles 1, whenever there'd be a resurgence in the Beatles and their albums were on the charts on Billboard in the top 200, you'd always see these two collections. And they might be at the bottom of the top 200, but they're always there. They were there for a long time, much the same way that anytime Beatles albums resurface now on the charts, the Beatles 1 is always there. It's always included. So, these are really, I think the Red and the Blue are both really fine collections. And it's true that we shouldn't ignore these. If I was to introduce people to the Beatles now for the first time, I would much rather introduce them to these two collections than to the Beatles 1.
See, I don't agree with that. I think for newbies, for real newbies, I think I would start with Beatles 1 and then move them to the Red and the Blues.
But there's so many songs that are on 1 that are
no, I know,
repeat,
But the Beatles 1 is distills their success down to those 27 tracks or whatever it is. But Alan, what do you?
Well, see, I would give them the 2009 boxed set with all of the albums in it because that's. I don't really think these albums are overlooked. A lot of people, when asked people who, unlike us, don't spend all their time following the Beatles. A lot of people, when asked, will say, what's your favorite Beatles album? They'll say the Red and the Blue, and as if they're really albums. And I can kind of understand that if you are not so fascinated with the Beatles that you have to have every track. This set, obviously it's going to be more well-rounded than 1 because the Red album has 26 tracks on it and the Blue album has 28 tracks on it, and that's an awful lot more tracks than is on 1. And as Ken said, it has some album tracks, so it gives you a really good summary. All the big hits are there, and a number of things that weren't released on singles are there. Some things were, I think, released on singles subsequently to this, actually.
And there's a lot of B-sides, too.
Yeah, there are a lot of Bs. I mean, the blue one starts with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, and so yeah, and it's a combination of the British singles and American singles. I think 8 Days a Week is here, and certain things that were singles here that weren't singles in Britain.
Well,
so
because I went through and I noted the tracks that did not make Beatles one, and there were some pretty significant omissions.
Well, yeah, but look at how many tracks. I mean,
right.
Beatles one has what, 20?
Right, 27.
27?
Oh, I know. I get your point. I'm saying they left off "Please Please Me."
Yeah,
they
that
left
was stupid.
Well,
they left off "All My Lovin'."
the purpose of this was to put all number ones on there.
No, I know.
So,
I understand that.
There were lots of hits the Beatles had that didn't make number one, that they just wanted to put the chart toppers on there.
Well, what I'm saying is that the Red Album and the Blue Album have some important tracks that, I mean, I understand their concept, but there are some real bad omissions on Beatles 1. And everybody, I mean, the Beatles 1 has been, basically the standard, for Beatles compilations, and it really shouldn't be.
No, I don't agree with that at all. If the purpose is to have just number ones, the only thing you can debate is Please Please Me. Mm-hmm. Because the reason why Please Please Me wasn't on there is because they had 4 different charts going on in England at the same time, and it went by, I think, it had to be unanimous that a song had to be number one on all 4 of those charts to make it to be considered a number one. And Please Please Me didn't make it on one of those charts. And so, yeah, I certainly think Please Please Me deserved it. In fact, you always heard the Beatles mention their first number one, Please Please Me, on the Beatles' Christmas message. But it wasn't number one on all those charts.
Neither was Let Me Do.
But Let Me Do was number one here.
Okay.
Well, then that doesn't hold up with the argument that Strawberry Fields Forever isn't on Beatles 1.
Because Penny Lane was the number one hit here, and the flip side, Strawberry Fields, went to number 8. Whereas in the UK, the single itself didn't make number one. There was a big deal about that. That was the first single that didn't make number one in quite some time for the Beatles. So Penny Lane, at the time here in America, both sides of the single charted separately up until the time of Come Together and Something, when things changed.
I get that. I'm just saying, by the omissions of that song and Please Please Me, I mean, it just points up the weakness of Beatles 1. That's my point. So and the other interesting thing is, another interesting thing is the fact that when they put it out on CD, they use the vinyl ordering for the CDs, which was kind of dumb to make 2 CDs for the Red Album when they didn't need it. So I remember,
at the same time, since you were talking about the Beatles 1, there were songs like the Ballad of John and Yoko, which didn't make number one here, but made number one in the UK, and that made it. So you have the benefit of having the Ballad of John and Yoko on there, despite the fact that it didn't make number one here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that means they were inconsistent then. So.
Well, I tend to look at things more positively. If you're going strictly by number ones, whichever made number one on either here or in the UK, it's on there. That's what that CD is supposed to represent. And by the same token, Day Tripper, which was a double-sided hit here in America, we can work it out, went to number one. Day Tripper didn't. But Day Tripper was a double-sided hit in the UK, which went to number one, and that's why Day Tripper's on there. Mm-hmm. So you do have the benefit of songs that were hits there, bigger hits there, that weren't number ones here.
Please all, please none. Alan, you got something to
there's something else about the Red and the Blue, which is that they were the first of the post-breakup compilations to come out, and then Capitol in particular, and I guess EMI sort of just picked up on what Capitol was putting together, but they then put together, rock and roll music and love songs and movie music, real music, and put out all these things. And the Beatles kind of objected to that. And when they finally settled their 20 years worth of lawsuits with EMI in 1989, one of the provisions was that EMI could not assemble its own compilations and that anything they had to do had to be approved by the Beatles. The exception that they allowed was the Red and the Blue albums. They allowed, even in 1989, I'm not sure when they finally came out on CD, it looks like 93. So that was like 4 years later. But even in 89, they were saying that the Red and Blue albums will come out. And they were the only just sort of general compilations that they allowed at the time. So that's saying something, I think they recognized that if you want an overview of their music, not a thematic thing like let's just get the number ones or whatever, that the Red and the Blue really did serve a purpose. And then they also have remastered them, since the first CD issue. So I think that speaks in their favor, too. I mean, as you guys know, I'm not a big compilation fan. But that's just because I have all the stuff. I don't really need a compilation. I can make my own playlist. I can make my own mixtape, whatever it is. But, I mean, I have these, and I have the remasters, and I have the vinyl from several countries. So, it's they really are good sets. I mean, if, and... Yeah, and I think that like I say, a lot of people say that they're their favorites. A lot of people say that they were introduced to the Beatles through these sets. So, there's that.
One thing that could always be debatable is, for most people, greatest hits albums and compilations are important. A lot of people buy only those and don't buy the individual albums from certain artists. But if you're going to eventually get deeper into an artist's catalog, a lot of fans start off with greatest hits albums. And prior to the Red and the Blue, we only had a collection of Beatle oldies in the UK. Mm-hmm. And here in America, we had the Hey Jude compilation. Mm-hmm. But those really weren't complete in any way.
They were really just sort of catch-alls for things that hadn't been on albums in both cases.
Right. Mm-hmm. But... no, the Red and the Blue is certainly extremely important, and I think it's important for a number of reasons. Like I said, you have to have some kind of greatest hits compilation, although I was going to say that's kind of debatable because sometimes I often wish there wasn't a greatest hits on the Beatles and it would force everybody to buy everything because so many songs could have been hits that weren't hits. And, to focus mainly on the singles, a lot of people may not feel the singles are their best songs. Some of them are, some of them are not. The Beatles catalog is so solid throughout, you want everyone to just learn it all, know every song in the catalog. But, these are great starter CDs. And I also think that it had a tremendous impact on radio because a lot of the album cuts that are on here became played more, I think, because they were on these compilations. Not that they weren't played before that, but a lot of stations focused on these songs. They became more emphasis cuts. They became more classic. They became more justified for playing them because they were on here.
All right, let me ask a question then, Ken. Speaking, because you're the radio guy here. When that album came out, how did you look at that album as instrumental to programming, what you were doing?
Well, first of all, not so much what I was doing, but what I heard on the radio. Mm-hmm. I didn't get involved with radio until 1982. That's when I started in radio. Okay. But as far as what I heard on the radio, a lot of the album cuts that are on here got played a lot. And they became classics. And, I'm talking about all the years since. If a classic rock station's going to play an album cut from the Beatles, they're likely to play something. Well, first of all, classic rock, for the most part, doesn't play anything pre-1967 unless there's a specialty program of some kind. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to play anything at all from the Beatles that's an album cut, on a classic rock station, you're likely that it's going to be something on the Blue Collection. It's likely that it's going to be Lucy in the Sky or A Day in the Life from Sgt. Pepper, or Sgt. Pepper and With Little Help from My Friends, although all the other songs in that album are worth playing. But these songs became the emphasis songs on radio, especially classic rock radio.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I mean, let's take the White Album, for example. One of the few criticisms I might make about this collection is that for a double album, you've only got 3 songs on there. I don't know necessarily if these were the ones I'd pick, but they were Back in the USSR, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and Obla Di Obla Da. So if you're listening to a classic rock station that's going to play music from 1967 on it, they're going to play anything from the White Album, there's a very good chance it's going to be While My Guitar Gently Weeps. There's a good chance it's Back in the USSR. And I'm talking about in regular programming, not a weekend Beatles show. It's going to be those songs. They tend to be those songs.
Yeah. Another thing, we were talking about this before we started, was how they shoved most of George Harrison's songs onto the last CD on 67 to 70. But I mean, that
when his best stuff was coming out,
right? Yeah,
but
I was going to say
that. We could get into some good fights here, probably, by talking about what they should have left off and what they should have left on. And they could easily have put on Taxman on 62 to 66 and had one George Harrison song on there at least.
Yeah, that's an omission that, I mean, the fact that there's, nothing by George Harrison on the first CD is a mind blower. Why they did that, that's just really strange.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you look at the Red Album and you've got, well, if you consider Drive My Car to be a Rubber Soul song, which in America it wasn't, but if you think of it as Rubber Soul, then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 songs from Rubber Soul and 1 song from Revolver.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost half of Rubber Soul right there, you know?
Yeah.
I think they could have got, I mean, if it were up to me, I'd get rid of Obla Di Obla Da, and I'd get rid of Long and Winding Road, probably.
No, you can't get rid of that.
Yeah, can. Don't like it.
It's the #1 record, and it was their last #1.
Yeah. So what?
It's their swan song.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't.
Well, you got it on the one album, but
right.
I would have.
But we didn't know there would be a one album back then.
Okay.
And if you've got "Love Me Do" on here, their first single, you should have their last single.
Well. Okay, I think actually if you're going to have Long and Winding Road on there, you should have Long and Winding Road from what also wasn't out at the time, which is Let It Be Naked, because that's much more bearable.
That's you.
Yeah, of course it is. It's me talking.
I like all the versions.
We know you do.
But
I would put on Rain. I would put on the Inner Light or something more of George's, and I really like the Inner Light, and it doesn't get played a lot, and I would put that in there somewhere. I guess right next to Lady Madonna. And what else? I would also, if redoing it now, I would use one of the versions of Across the Universe from either Let It Be Naked or Anthology 3, also get rid of the sort of slowed down, horrible sounding Spectre version. And because those 2 other versions, without all the overdubs and with the Indian instruments more pronounced, those are just exquisite, and I think that the song would benefit greatly from being heard in a better version than it's usually heard in.
But you got to put yourself, in 1973 times.
Right.
And those versions didn't come out then.
I mean, there's a bunch of. I mean, you can go through the list and come up with. I mean, Do You Want to Know a Secret would have been a great song to put on there, although it wasn't as in the forefront as some of the other songs on there. There's quite a few. I mean, you could go through the list and come up with. I mean, we were talking about "Gotta Get You Into My Life" earlier. I mean, that would have been a good one too. I mean, we can nitpick on that a lot. And I mean, what playlist is there what Beatles playlist is there that somebody, or a list period, of Beatles songs that somebody doesn't say, no, let's put that. I mean, there's all sorts of things we could have done with this. I mean, I pretty much, they pretty much hit the mark, as far as that goes.
Sometimes when I see that "And I Love Her" is on here, I always, when I think of "And I Love Her," I think of "If I Fell," because they're a part of the same single in America, and they were the two great ballads from A Hard Day's Night.
Mm-hmm.
But "If I Fell" is not on here. So, I mean, this is not a perfect collection, but it's still a very good collection.
Right. I Saw Her Standing There. It's another one that, that's Mr. Cozen.
This is why I would give people the 2009 boxed set. It's all there.
Another thing we should mention is the cover photos, which are really actually cool retro. Well, in the case of the 67 to 70, they went back to the original site and did stood in the same spots. That building, by the way, is gone now.
Right.
Long gone. But that's really cool that they did that.
Yeah, that was originally going to be the cover for the Get Back album.
Right.
That photo shoot. And I think the one on the Red album is not the same one as Please Please Me. I think it's an outtake from that same bunch of sessions. Mm-hmm. Or that same session, that same photo session.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great idea to have those two like that.
Yeah. I'm glad they used that picture, the later picture. It's too bad they never put out the Get Back album. I think that was a big mistake. But my thinking, Ken,
we disagree on that one, but that's another show.
Really? That's definitely another show. I'm writing that down.
I want to ask the two of you, considering the fact that the White Album was a double album, how many songs do you think would have been fair to put on this collection, since there were only 3?
I can't see more than 3 or 4.
Really?
Yeah, because you had a lot of other songs competing against it. I mean, there's so many songs. I mean, I gave you names of a couple, and Alan said, I mean, you could have been very, you could have been very arbitrary as far as what you were going to put on this thing, and they did what they did, and for the most part, I think they made some good choices, but personal opinion, there were things. Rock and roll music is another one. So, there's.
They made sure all the songs on here were originals. There's no covers.
True, and that's a good point too. That they didn't use any, covers, but that didn't mean that they couldn't have. They didn't. But I guess probably that was part of the. I didn't even realize that they didn't use any covers. But unless you want to count the little introduction to "All You Need Is Love," is it? But.
And the Indian intro to Help. I mean, the James Bond intro to Help.
Right.
But Ken has a point. I mean, if you have 6 songs from Rubber Soul, and the double album had 30 tracks on it, 3 isn't a great representation. So.
I love the song. Don't get me wrong, but I would have taken "Girl" off.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great song. Mm-hmm. But you've already got enough from Rubber Soul on here.
Right.
And there could have been a few more from Revolver, like you said. If you've got a great love song like "In My Life" or "Michelle," what's wrong with having "Here, There, and Everywhere" in there?
Right.
Oh, really? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no question that you could have made choices, and actually that's a good question to throw out to our listeners, that if you have an alternate track listing for either of the albums or both of them together, we'd love to see what you do. So you can send them to the Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com, and we'll have a look at them, and who knows, maybe we'll mention you. But
in terms of Revolver as well, that would go on the 62 to 66 set, which is really a single CD's worth of music.
Right.
So there's plenty of flex room there.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the big, like I think I said earlier, that was one of the big criticisms of the CD, that they had plenty of room they didn't need to make it 2 CDs, and people were complaining about the fact that they were, it was basically a money grabber to do that. And, you can take that, you can disagree with that or not, but I mean, the fact is that they could have fit the whole album on 1 CD. So,
Yeah.
I should correct myself here. I said there's 1 song from Revolver. There's 2. So
2, that's true. But there are no songs from Yellow Submarine except for Yellow Submarine, which isn't really from Yellow Submarine. You know what I mean?
Right.
I could have gone with Hey Bulldog on this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was looking down the list, and I thought about that too. So,
See, on the one hand, I love the fact that Old Brown Shoe is part of this, because I think it's a great B-side. And in a way, it kind of justifies, as far as the White Album is concerned, if I had to pick between Old Brown Shoe or Piggy's Long, Long, Long and Savoy Truffle, I'd go with Old Brown Shoe. As far as an outstanding track. I love the other ones, but I think Brown Shoe works better. Right.
Well, I mean, yeah, the debates are endless. I mean, but the fact remains that it's a great compilation, and it deserves I think, a little better recognition than it's getting now. So at least they remastered it, which says a lot, which says that the Beatles do have a lot of respect for it. They haven't remastered rock and roll music, love songs, the film compilation. They haven't done that either, and probably never will. But
they prohibited that basically.
Right. So, I mean, they've done worse. They did the U.S. albums box, which was where they took the U.S. albums and they made them all remasters, and the Japanese did the same thing. I mean, they could conceivably do that.
Yeah.
But they haven't.
Right.
So, and actually, not to get too off the track, but rock and roll music is actually a good compilation for what it is. Love songs, not so much, at least in my opinion. But
I like both.
Do you?
I think they're well chosen songs.
Do you?
So let's not forget the Tomorrow Never Knows compilation. That was, that's sort of like half a rock and roll music in a way. It was the same intention, the hard rocking Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
And in most cases, that was a download-only album, although they did press up, some 12-inch vinyl. I have a 12-inch vinyl of that record.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that came out.
Yes, it did. Yes, it
I
did.
think it
They
came
never
out as promo only. I'm not sure you could buy it.
It did. It did come out as promo only. They did not. I don't recall seeing any CDs of that. Do you, Alan?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Yep. So.
I got one more question.
Go ahead.
Do you think that Sgt. Pepper was well represented on the blue set? Because the one thing I find rather strange is that for an album that's considered to be Paul's baby, whether you agree with that or not, the songs that Paul sings lead to on the entire songs, like Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, She's Leaving Home, although John, does the counter melody on that.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm 64, Lovely Rita, none of them are in there. You've only got Sgt. Pepper, the opening cut of the album, that has Paul on a lead vocal, and also the bit he does on A Day in the Life. So it's kind of strange, in a way, that the songs that are predominantly Paul, mainly Paul, are not in here.
It's not like he's not represented on this thing.
I'm only talking about Sgt. Pepper here.
Right.
I'm not talking about the whole collection.
Well, that could play into another debate that I don't know about debate, but discussion that Steve and I were having before we started the show and before you turned up, Ken. Which was Steve was mentioning rumors that Alan Klein might have sequenced the sets, which we never got to the bottom of. If anybody knows anything more about that, it would be good to hear.
I do have the rough guide to the Beatles in front of me, and it says that.
Right, and so that could explain why a lot of Paul's stuff is missing. Right,
but and it's also in Wikipedia, which I don't trust. But rough guide is a fairly decent source. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and it's not mentioned. His name is not in the books because in the booklets because we sat here and I scoured them before we started talking, and it's not there. So,
Right.
but yeah, that you're right. That would explain that. But
Hmm.
remember too that at the time these albums came out, Sgt. Pepper hadn't really attained the mythological status that it's got now. At least I don't think so.
You don't
I mean,
think?
it's no. I think it's. I mean, that's not to say it wasn't always celebrated, but yeah, I think between then and now, I think it's gained a lot more. Don't you? No.
Hmm.
I don't know.
It's hard for me to imagine in 1973 what people were thinking about. I always remember hearing throughout most of my teenage years onward that Sgt. Pepper was the greatest rock album of all time and the most important one. It was always number one on every single list. So that's the memory that sticks with me about Sgt. Pepper.
Well, I agree with that. I'm not saying it's. I mean, it wasn't. Not that it wasn't celebrated. It was, and it was. I mean, I remember one time listening to Dan Ingram on WABC freaking out while he was playing Strawberry Fields Forever. Not, I mean, obviously it's not on the album, but I remember he was questioning the whole idea of, what are the Beatles doing? This is a different Beatles, which is kind of weird. But but I mean, again, what I'm saying is, back in '73, while Sgt. Pepper was only a few years old,
Right.
where I mean, it's been written about and talked about and written about and talked about much more since then, and to the point where I don't even think the Beatles thought of it the way they do now. And obviously, with what we just went through with the release of the deluxe set, I mean, look how many years it took them to do that. So
That's because they weren't into anniversaries.
well,
they didn't really want to.
Takes.
Well, I mean, and how many? I mean, let's not get into that again because we did talk about that and how they resisted it, but it's all part of that. I mean, Pepper is a lot more celebrated. It's a lot more well known than it was back in '73. I would stand on that. I mean, Alan, you can disagree with that, but I would.
Yeah, I disagree. I think in '73, I think in '68, it was already considered the best thing that they'd ever done.
There
was a lot of debate about whether the White Album is as good as Pepper or not as good as Pepper, and then everything after that, everything was being held up to Pepper.
Think about everything that's been said, like when the anniversary came out recently, that when Sgt. Pepper came out, it wasn't just a release, it was an event.
No, I agree with that.
That's how people looked at it then.
But I don't think so. I don't think if you had done that set in '73, it would have been the same thing. I don't. I mean, that's not to say that we wouldn't have celebrated it as much. I mean, we were looking, I mean, the whole bootleg thing was just starting, at that point. But I don't think it would have gotten the notice, the acclaim among the fans in the same way. Maybe I could be wrong. I'm thinking back kind of, I mean, that's a long time ago. So I'm not saying that my memory is really clear on what happened back then. But I mean, it just seems to me that the enjoyment and the admiration for Pepper, although it was great, is greater now. Does that make a little more sense? No?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, today, the big debate is whether or not Revolver is a better album. And that's all I ever hear about. That Revolver surpasses Sgt. Pepper and more people prefer it now, or many people do, and it tops lists. And people now say the accepted word is that while Sgt. Pepper may not be the best album of all time, it's the most important album of all time. That's what's accepted.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to, but
okay,
and who you're reading. But I don't particularly agree with that. I think Pepper is the king as far as that goes. And don't forget Abbey Road too. I mean, so
it's a never-ending debate.
Right. We could sit here and have a boxing match and
With these things, I mean, okay, apart from the sort of weird outlier of Rubber Soul having nearly half the album on the Red set, generally speaking, I think they were trying to give you a taste of all these albums, but not like give away the whole album, so that they'd have like just a few of the best things from the album, and then maybe you'd want to go out and buy the whole album. And I think, even in the case of Rubber Soul, if you look at it and consider that this album was probably assembled in the U.S., whether it was by Klein or not, the thing is that a bunch of those Rubber Soul songs for us were Yesterday and Today songs. So maybe they thought of it in a slightly different way. Maybe they were looking at it more that way.
Ken, let me ask a question. Do you think the album was programmed, or do you think the albums were programmed well? In other words, the flow from track to track. Do you think if you were to play them, is that the order you would have played them?
I hardly ever think about that, and I haven't.
I stumped him.
They're pretty much chronological, aren't they?
It's chronological.
Pretty much. Although, as I noted as we were talking beforehand, the order on the one album is different on some of the tracks. They don't fall in the same. In other words, the one tracks were not plucked from that CD and in that same order, which is really kind of weird. So. I don't get that at all.
What was out of order on one?
I Feel Fine is before 8 Days a Week on the one album. It's after 8 Days a Week on the Red album. Okay. Yesterday is after Help on the one. It's before Help on the Red. We're trying to do this in Day Tripper is before We Can Work It Out on the one. It's after on the Red. I mean, those are the weird things.
What difference does it make? I mean, if it's a single if it's a double-sided single, they both came out at the same time.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter which one was first on one release and which one was first on the other.
My question was, as programming it, segueing the tracks one into the other.
I think in the case of like Yesterday and Help, you've got Yesterday ending CD1 here and Help beginning CD2. And since they're opening Help with the James Bond thing, I think that pretty much had to be the opener of the CD. So even though, Yesterday you would normally put after Help if you're going like, chronologically or... because it was on side 2 of the Help album and came out as a single after Help in the U.S. But I think for programming, if you're looking at it in terms of separate CDs rather than one unified playlist, it kind of makes sense to start CD2 with Help and maybe end CD1 with Yesterday. It's a good track, good starting point. Right,
but let's take that into a continuous playlist. Is a continuous playlist, does that work, or does it really matter?
I don't think it really matters, but I think if you're going to talk about a continuous playlist, then you have to let me put my other versions of Across the Universe.
I wouldn't have done that in this context. I wouldn't have done that because at the time we hadn't heard those. So,
well, probably the next time these are going to be remastered, they're going to have Giles Martin's new mixes, so we haven't heard those either.
Right. which we will have to look forward to at some point, probably.
Even though I haven't listened to these compilations for quite a while, I just remember that they really flowed well.
Mm-hmm.
That was my question. Did they flow well? And okay. Anyway. All right, so that I think that says a lot, and I think we've pretty well taken everything that we can take out of this discussion. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about as far as these things go?
Not really.
You think okay. I think we've reached our time limit. We'll start with Alan. Tell everybody how they can contact you.
I'm easy to find on Facebook, either under Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remixed.
Okay. Ken?
My email address is everylittlething@att.net, and my website is kenmichaelsradio.com. Just want to mention that within the last couple of weeks since we did our last show, I did an interview with Zach Nilsson, one of Harry Nilsson's sons. You were expecting Starkey, weren't you?
Yeah, there was a little bit of the dramatic effect there, Ken. Like, whoa, really? Okay.
But he was a lot of fun, and he talked a lot about his life with his father, and some Beatles stories are in there. And he's got a great speaking voice, too. He should do voice work. Anyway, you can find his interview on interviews page 4 of my website. It's kind of ironic because I've got Alex Orbison, Roy Orbison's son, on there, and then Zach Nilsson, Harry Nilsson's son, on there. So
here comes the sons.
There you go. Maybe I'll get all the Nilsson family on that page.
Okay.
Anyway, and of course, there's always my weekly Beatles trivia, where you can win 1 out of 9 prizes every single week just by knowing your Beatles history and Beatle music. So visit my website at kenmichaelsradio.com.
Okay, and you can get to me. I have my own Facebook page. I have a Beatles news and information group, and you can get a hold of me at my personal Facebook page, which is I post music and other things. I know people have complained about me posting non-Beatles stuff, but on my personal page I do. And I also have a Beatles news and information group where I post strictly Beatles, and anybody that wants to join is welcome to. We also, as far as the show goes, we have a Things We Said Today Beatles radio show page on Facebook where we post information about the show. We have there's another Things We Said Today show about our broadcasts on fab4radio.com, and thanks to Matt at fab4radio.com for broadcasting the show on the weekends.
As well as running my show.
As well as running your show. Yes, that's correct. And you can email us with comments, criticisms, money, God knows what, at thingswesaidtodayradioshow@gmail.com. I think that pretty well kicks it for today, guys. Any final words?
I forgot to say one thing.
Go ahead.
This coming Saturday, which is May the 12th, I will be at Musquamacut Beach in Rhode Island, and Joey Molland of Badfinger fame will be doing a concert at 8 p.m. there, as well as Phil Solom, who's from the band The Rembrandts, great power pop band, and I might be introducing Joey on stage. So if you're in the area, please stop by and say hello to me and enjoy that concert this Saturday night.
Thank you. Okay. I think that's going to do it, folks. This has been a lot of fun, and we will be back before you know it with another weekly discussion of who knows what about the Beatles. Who knows where we'll go. Only we know, and we're not telling right now. Anyway.
No, we really don't know.
We really don't. In any event, for Alan Kozin and Ken Michaels, this is Steve Marinucci saying thank you for listening to Things We Said Today. Tell your friends about us, and we will see you next time.